Good, everyone, and welcome to this session of Business Readers. I want to welcome our speaker today and also the over 130 participants that are coming to us from right around this beautiful country and also elsewhere outside of the borders here. My name is Abdul Rahimi, and I'm here at Goodman School of Business. So welcome to all of you today. So on the area of emotional intelligence, such a hot topic, such a relevant topic in today's environment, especially in the post-COVID, post-wave 1 COVID era, and in the middle of COVID wave 2, obviously. But a lot of us are returning to the and adapting the new normal, and of course, it's so important, especially in this time, in that we are that bit more aware of the emotional side of things, given all that we are experiencing. Goodman Group, as you know, is a community services provider that helps individuals with their career progression, taking them to the next level. Businesses with business management consultancy and startup support is provided for all those entrepreneurs here in Niagara and outside to help them take their business ideas to the next level. In terms of formats, for those that are joining us afresh today, we'll briefly recap on that. And so Lesley will speak for approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity to answer any questions and comments that you may have. So I would encourage you to put your questions and comments in the chat feature, which is open now. And you may also tweet those using @GSB Goodman Group. That's @GSB Goodman Group, all one word. So feel free to tweet your responses, your questions live, but also put them in the chat feature, and we will put those to Lesley towards the back end. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand the screen over to our speaker for today and allow her to say a few words of introductory remarks for herself, and that's Lesley. Lesley, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna go back here. Look at that, I can unfold paper. Thank you so much to Abdul and the Goodman Group for having me this morning at Business Breathers, and also to all of you who are taking the time to join in. It's such a busy world right now, and such a different universe that we're living in. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm really looking forward to digging into this topic with you. If any of you have ever spent any time with me, either chatting in person, chatting online, or spending any time together in the social media world, you know I love to talk about emotional intelligence and really how it moves us ahead. So today we're going to be really digging into maximizing emotionally effective leadership when we're in the fast lane. And so I'm going to get into, as we move through the slide deck, I'll get into more about what the fast lane is, but really it's how do we stay in positive forward motion in this COVID era, because that's really where we are as leaders of self and leaders of others. As Abdul said, my name is Lesley Calvin. My company is Positive Forward Motion, and I'm a coach, trainer, and keynote speaker in the field of emotional intelligence. So who am I beyond that? I'm a former higher education administrator, leader of people. From there, my passion from working with people led to my coaching designation and my certification as an emotional intelligence specialist. Most importantly is I'm obsessed with supporting you, every one of you, to and myself to live and lead while we're in the fast lane of life and work. But the most important thing to understand is, like you, I'm first and foremost human. And under our professional and leadership exteriors, we are all human, and that shared humanity makes us emotionally driven human beings, right? We can't escape those, nor should we ever. And I always say, you know, we can't suppress emotions. What we want to do is acknowledge them, honor them, and then neutralize them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how we can do just that. Okay, so your energy is your choice. The really interesting thing about energy is it literally means, from the Latin, emotions in motion, right? So that is what our energy is, and it is our choice. Our circumstances are rarely our choice. I doubt any of us out there would be thinking, this is exactly what I'm looking for in the world right now, a pandemic. No, we can't change that. We can't change those circumstances, but what we can do is really get to understand where our hotspots are, and then what we can do about that. So today, what we're going to do is begin in our 30 minutes to understand, how our emotions shape who we are, and that's very individual to all of us. So how that shapes who we are, where our triggers are, and how they impact our ability to relate and react to others, and to really begin to be mindful about how we foster that positive and emotional effective leadership in practice when we're in the fast lane in COVID. Okay, so the thing about emotional intelligence is, what is the definition? And I can tell you, and I haven't fact checked this, but I can tell you there are about 11 billion different variants on what those definitions look like. And when you're out there, either in social media or doing some research, what you're going to be looking at is a bit of a mixed model, right? There's going to be probably some Goodman, some Selfawareness, some of the one that we're talking about today. They're all good, right? So I studied quite a bit of it in my Master's of Organizational Leadership from the Goodman perspective, and now I do a lot of training with other frameworks. All good, all good. There's nothing wrong, as long as we're in the realm of talking about how our emotions are impacting us. It's all good. So emotional intelligence, what is it? It is the ability to recognize and understand and process our own emotions, as well as start to recognize those in other people, so that we can start having those really rich and positive interactions with ourselves and with others. This really helps holistically, and so I think it's really important when we're talking about that emotional intelligence, and when we're talking about emotionally effective leadership. How is it impacting us personally as people, as well as work? So remember, with the first in the first slide, we are human first. So what we are experiencing in our personal lives, we're bringing into our work lives, into our professional lives, into our leadership lives. And what we're experiencing in our lives as leaders and as professionals, we're bringing into our personal life. So we really want to have that foundation of understanding what emotional intelligence is, and how we're acknowledging and honoring and processing our own emotions, and then how that is translating then from this for the purposes of today into our to our leadership world. So what is emotionally effective leadership? It's really using that foundation of your emotional intelligence to then be able to lead through that filter of understanding in more emotionally charged situations. So when there's a values conflict, when we're firm in our beliefs, when we're in the fast lane, again, we're going to get into what the fast lane is, as well as any other situation in the workplace as leaders, and that could be leader of self, leading from the middle, or if you're in a position of positional power, positional leadership, how are you taking that into account? Okay, so what are we going to look at today? So first of all, I'm going to highlight 3 emotional intelligence subcompetencies. So in this framework, there's 15. So this is a little teaser in our 30 minutes. It's a good thing I talk fast, because I'll be able to get an overview of those in. Then we're going to explore the fast lane implications on our ability to be emotionally effective as leaders. And then we're going to do a mini exploration around strengths, gaps, and I'm going to have you leave with some growth opportunities for yourself. Okay, sound good? So this is the model that I said before, that there's sort of that mixed model. This one is the bar on emotional intelligence EQI 2.0. So just in case you're referencing it later, this one has 15 competencies. The reason I like to do coaching and training around this one is because it's very actionable, right? It's broken down, and we can find specific ways to move ourselves forward. So the 3 EI competencies that I'm going to talk about today are self-awareness, empathy, and optimism. So self-awareness is that it's really being able to understand, pull back that curtain, hold up a mirror, look in our blind spots to what is emotionally charging us, right? When are we moving outside of our natural happy place, and what is doing that? So remember, when we're talking about emotional intelligence competencies, it's always referring to when you're emotional, right? So when we're we're probably pretty self-aware most times when on most days about who we are and how we react, but it's when we're emotional. Second one we're going to look into and discuss a little bit is empathy. So empathy is the ability to really see things from another perspective, to honor and respect another person's journey and their emotions, and to be able to conduct ourselves in a way that really honors their experience, while from a leadership perspective, taking into account what you need to get done. So that's in the interpersonal quadrant here. And the final one I'm going to touch on today is optimism. So optimism is not rainbows and unicorns, right? It's not, again, it's not that the circumstance is always great for us. Optimists don't believe that it is, but with optimism, what you really want to do is make sure that in that frame of challenging times that you're creating hope, right? And solutions. So a great way to explain optimism is if you imagine that you are, on a flight and you hit tolerance or turbulence. You look over at the flight attendant and he or she is, they have their card and, oh, would you like another drink? Can I get you this? And put your seatbelt on. It's going to be a bit bumpy. And so they have that feeling of hope and solution that, okay, it's a bit bumpy, but we're going to be fine. The same situation if you were in that flight and you started to hit turbulence and you look over at the flight attendant and they're like, ah! Everyone is going to panic, right? And so right now, as a world, we're in turbulence, right? And so what our people, what your team, what your peers, what even your family, your leaders, your bosses all need is all of us to exhibit a bit of hope in a turbulent world, that there are some solutions. So again, touching on self-awareness, that is really when you're not able to touch into that optimism, this is when we want to start talking to, a trusted friend or a mentor, a coach about how am I interacting? How am I in these situations with empathy? I can tell you right now, when we're ticked, when we're a little hot under the collar, when we're maybe not feeling our best, empathy is one of the first competencies to go, right? And so it's really something important from a leadership perspective that we check ourselves and we're like, okay, am I seeing this from their perspective? Am I understanding what they're going through? Sometimes as leaders, when, for example, when somebody asks you a question for the, maybe 10th time, and you didn't necessarily think it needed to be asked the one time, that's not necessarily when our empathy is high. It's probably, already head for the hills there. So it's time to sort of take that self-awareness. Okay, why am I feeling a bit triggered right now? Obviously, I'm not explaining it to the way they can hear it. What can I do about that? And rechecking in, like, okay, so how can I help you with this, right? And then touching back into that optimism piece. So self-awareness, this is the gift. This is the self-awareness is the inner work that drives our outer success. Simply put, empathy in its own is a renewable human resource. The more you give, the more you receive. Optimism is a mindset and a gift that we give to ourselves and we share with others. And these are the things that start to move us in positive forward motion. Okay, so the fast lane. You ready for it? So these are our frustrations, assumptions, stresses, and triggers. So when we are in the fast lane, and this is a proprietary program that a way to look at how our stresses start to, or our emotional self starts to build. So frustrations are those small things, right? Those are the things that, we can get around them. They irritate us, but they're part of the human experience. Everyone has frustrations. Not the biggest deal, but just check yourself when you're starting to have those. Assumptions, this is when we start to get into murky, dangerous water as leaders, because this is when we're starting to create narrative or stories around people and situations, and not necessarily the truth. This ties into another emotional intelligence subcompetencies that we won't have a chance to go into today. That's around reality testing. Really sort of, and I'll sort of just drop that as a little bonus. Is it really how we think it is, or are we creating a story? Then stress is when we start to really this is when it starts to permeate and become part of who we are. So once we get to the stress and triggers when our values, we can be in a values compromise or a beliefs, or our inner critic. It's a bit of coach speak, but our inner critic or our gremlin is at work. And these are the things that really sort of start to ramp up our emotional reactiveness. And so this is around here. When you're feeling emotionally charged, start to think, okay, am I in the fast lane? Is it just a frustration? And can I move past it? Am I starting to create an assumption, a story maybe that I need to check myself on? Or is it starting to build into that stress and trigger situation? Whenever we get into the stresses or the triggers, that's when you want to start to, talk to a trusted friend, talk to a mentor, talk to a coach, talk to someone and start to dig into the why. Why am I so triggered by this? Okay. So I'm going to pull this up. So you can imagine then all of this information that I've given you, and we have the backdrop of the 3 competencies we're talking about. So the stimulus hits, whatever that happens to be. It could be somebody showing up late for work. It could be somebody not being able to get something to you, somebody dropping the ball from your team. Whatever the stimulus is, sometimes it's somebody in the grocery store walking slowly in front of you, depending on where you are on the stress meter. Then what you want to do is, okay, I've hit the fast lane. Okay, I'm frustrated. I'm making assumptions. I'm building, and now I'm really stressed, and now I'm triggered. So how is that impacting your leadership effectiveness, right? So at that point, if you're working with one of your team, one of your peers, a boss, and you're starting to feel that emotional bubbling, take pause. Think of this circle, take pause before you decide on your next move, right? Because this is when you start to make either a positive or a not so positive move forward in terms of being effective, right? So if you think, okay, so I'll use an example of somebody showing up late, right? And you say, oh, they're always late. They're always late, they're undependable, they have this. And so you're starting to create that story about why they're late. You're not checking the reality of why they're late. You're just starting to. Now it's starting to stress. Well, if they're late, I have to get this information to my boss. So now we're moving up into stress, right? Now maybe the inner critic is triggered to say, oh, I can't be late with this assignment or this product because I'm a perfectionist, your inner critic is coming out and I have to do everything perfect, right? So you can see how the emotions in the fast lane really start to build on themselves. Now, before you take action, it's really important to pause, breathe, and reflect. So the breathe part is pretty funny because a couple of years ago, I was in a very stressful point of life. And we had gone up to Algonquin to just take some time away, be in nature. And I have an Apple Watch. I'm not sure how many out there have an Apple Watch, but there's one feature that is a breathe feature, and it breathes and goes. And so I had it set on, and my daughter thought this was hysterical. It came on, and she says, "Mommy, do you need to be reminded to breathe?" And out of the mouths of babes, right? And I said, "Oh, baby, yes, I do." Right? And so that simple act of pausing and taking breath, it's free. It's private. No one around you needs to know you're doing it. And it can be the thing that helps you squash down the fast lane, neutralize the fast lane before you take action, right? To say, okay, what is my frustration? Where are my assumptions around this? Where is this stressing me? Where is this my trigger? And then going back through that, you're doing that self-awareness. So that first quadrant we talked about, the first competency, that's the self-awareness piece, right? So now we're putting that into effect. Then, now that we've calmed ourselves down a little bit, and believe me, I know this because I've done this a million times, we've calmed yourself down, then it's be like that empathy. What's the other side? What's the journey there? What am I missing, and how can I then have that person's back, or find out maybe my assumptions were correct, right? But now I've proved them, and now I can take the next steps. Once we've had that moment, then we can move forward with the action, and perhaps that's a piece of optimism. Now we found that out. Maybe they're late because their car broke down, or that was obviously in the old days, because now maybe technology glitched. And now we can offer a little bit of optimism and solution to say, okay, you know what? Why don't we postpone? I mean, I'm just, making up whatever scenarios here, but why don't we postpone this while you work on your technology, and then we'll move forward, right? And so that person now, from a leadership effectiveness, you've now really sort of invested in that interpersonal, which is another quadrant, and really the essence. You've invested in yourself by taking that time to not to involve or not to have that highly reactive response. You've invested in yourself as a leader to then build that acumen around that emotionally stable and that self-awareness. And then you've also invested in the process of leadership with your team, or whoever this person was you were working with, because before you took action, you paused and you managed that emotion. Now, is that easy? Absolutely not. Is it worth it? Yes. So here's some growth opportunities. So how do we maximize our emotionally effective leadership? So growth opportunities. First thing I want you to do is, of the three that we talked about today, so self-awareness, empathy, and optimism, realizing there's 12 more, but just for the sake of our business breather today, where are you an emotional intelligence rock star? So on the side of your screen right now, you're going to see it's a sample of what an emotional intelligence assessment looks like. And you can see from this one here that this person is a rock star in problem solving, right? So when they took this, so I mean, during COVID and working from home, pandemic, masks and technology every day, right? There's something that we need to problem solve. So this person is really going to want to do more of that, right? How are they problem solving? And remember, anytime we're talking about emotional intelligence competencies, it's when you're emotionally charged, right? So when this person's emotionally charged, keep doing more of that. Now, here's the thing. It's also critical. And again, this goes back to that self-awareness one. Where are your emotional intelligence gaps areas? We all have them, right? And so this one here, this person, and again, this is a sample, theirs falls into empathy. So remember what I had mentioned a few slides back is when you have, when we're ticked, right? When we're in the fast lane or irritated, empathy is generally the first thing to go. So this person here is really going to want to pay more attention to where their empathy falls as a leader, because if they're already in a gap area, then emotional situations such as what we're dealing with now are going to be even more charged. One interesting thing, and I can tell you because now that we've all known each other about, 20, 30 minutes, when I did my first assessment with the coach that I was working with, one of my gap areas came back as assertiveness. And so, of course, me being me, I said, thank you for your time. Obviously, this is, not correct. And so you can take that because I think I'm a pretty assertive person, right? That's not something that, I do this for a living. I chat with people all the time. And he said, okay, awesome. I get that, Lesley. He was very gracious to me in my probably obnoxious response to him, and said, how are you when you are feeling, small or intimidated or threatened or shamed? And I said, well, I'm probably maybe a bit quieter. And he said, and how are you when you're feeling emotionally charged, when something or someone that you really value is maybe under threat? And I said, wow, oh my goodness. Like I said, I'm probably ready to get in there. And he's like, great. Okay. So when everything's great, you have a healthy assertiveness. And when you're emotionally charged, then you're passive or aggressive. And it was just such an epiphany for me that, oh, now I understand where my emotional intelligence is, where my boundaries are, and where my gap areas are. So it's something that from that point forward, I really started to dig into. So that's our next steps. Next steps, what we want to do is set an initial goal for yourself. So think about the three that we talked about today and think about, oh yeah, you know what, I could probably, when I'm heated, I could probably do with a bit of more self-awareness, or I'm not sure my optimism or my empathy is on point. But for example, maybe you want to set a goal around just simple mindfulness, right? Mindfulness in itself is a huge step forward. So maybe allocate, and these are just examples, maybe allocate 1 week to noticing where you're feeling emotionally triggered and when you are pushed into the fast lane. Or maybe you want to increase your optimism. So start to note and record assumptions or other that are cultivating or deflating your ability to be optimistic, right? And especially through a leadership lens, right? Because if you remember, if you're the flight attendant, we really need to be creating that hope-based approach. And again, remember, it's not rainbows and unicorns. It's saying, I know times are tough. I'm challenged as well, but I know working together, we can find some solutions, right? In that simple sentence, you're acknowledging from a self-awareness that you're challenged as well. And you're acknowledging that your team or your people are challenged. And you're also saying, but together I know that we can find the best solution in the circumstances. Again, we can't change those circumstances, but we can definitely work on our response to them. On the bottom of the screen here, there's a couple of downloads, free downloads on my website, pretty simple to get to. So it's lesleycalvin.ca downloads. One is an overview of the competencies, the emotional intelligence competencies, just in case this went a little too fast or you're eager before the recording comes out. And then the other one is a sample of the assessment. And really just have a look at that to see, okay, so where do I want to set my goals? Because this is your goal, should you choose to accept it, is to take a next step. So remember, the stimulus hits, right? Then we want to take pause, take a breath, take a business breather, take a breath, and reflect on what we're feeling and what our next steps are going to be, because our energy is our choice. Remember, your emotions, the energy, the Latin, the emotion is your choice. And are you going to choose to move forward being reactionary, emotionally charged, or are you going to choose to move forward being emotionally effective and responsive, right? The big difference being reactionary or responsive. All right. Thank you so much. And it has been a pleasure. I hope that you are able to set yourself a positive forward motion goal and move yourself forward even incrementally. Every penny makes a dollar.
Thank you, Lesley, very much for that. It's a very interesting topic, of course, and one that's close to many individual clients, and of course, in terms of relevance there. So thank you very much for that. I've got a question here as I look to my other screen to read this. With becoming more aware of being emotionally intelligent, will you be triggered less to go into the fast lane?
I love this question. I can tell you personally and professionally, yes, because as we start to recognize, so once you start to recognize your level of emotion, right? And so our central nervous system doesn't necessarily know what we're experiencing, they just know we're charged. So in the beginning, a frustration can give us the same sort of charge as a trigger, even though a trigger is more of that inner critic. So as we start to neutralize that, then we become, and anybody who's done my energy leadership workshop, then you're moving up and you're in that anabolic energy. Then the smaller things literally stop bugging you as much because you're applying, in the context of today's business breather, empathy. So something that maybe was frustrating to you before, now we can see it from the other perspective and respect that person's going in it and respond in that way. Right. And so those things sort of start to neutralize much easier. And then we become very hungry and eager to dig into the bigger things that are triggering us. And then we neutralize those. Right. And so a lot of the work that I know that I do with my clients, whether it's personally one-on-one or in workshops, is really start to have people identify, just like we did today when I was saying identify what those stimulus are for you. Because then we can let them go, right? Once we can acknowledge, once we see with that self-awareness, once we see what's bothering us, then we can be like, hey, why is it bothering me? And then you start doing the work around letting it go. So yes, in fact, as you start to become more aware of what you're thinking and feeling, increasing that mindfulness, it does naturally and organically start to
Right. Absolutely. Here a couple more. How can you coach your team to realize when they are becoming triggered, and how might they deal with it?
Okay, that's a great question. So the thing to remember in all things is we can only ever control ourselves, right? And so we have control over ourselves, and we can bring information to other people. So from a coaching perspective, what you want to do is supply information that creates perspective and context, right? And so, and ask them to start noticing. Again, they're going to choose to do that or not. There's people who are very interested and receptive to personal and professional growth. But by and large, once folks become more aware of themselves and their trigger areas, and once, you know, I said it in the slide deck, is empathy in itself is a renewable resource. So once we start to see things from other perspectives, and so if you're having these conversations with your teams and they're starting to share experiences with each other, and that might be very granular to start, right? Sharing our emotions is a very challenging thing for some folks. But once it starts to happen, then it starts to become something that people can see things from other perspectives and then start to note in themselves when they're in the fast lane.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. When we have a flash of temper, our emotions work faster than our reaction, of course. How do you develop strategies to address this?
Sorry, Abdul, you just glitched there, so I didn't catch the question. Would you mind repeating it?
Technology is fantastic, isn't it?
You know what?
Happy to repeat.
It's one of
So
those things, frustration. Yeah. Go ahead.
The question was, let me see, because I've got more questions popping up here. We have a flash of temper. Our emotions work faster than our rational mind. How do you develop strategies to it?
Okay, so I think I caught it mostly that time. So it's really when you have that impulsive response. So that impulsiveness is another subcompetency within the this training framework for EQI. And so impulsiveness is something that folks will have to work on, right? And so the more you become aware, and this was one that in that first goal of mindfulness, if you start to become mindful of things that are triggering you and creating those flashes of maybe a temper, is then you can start anticipating and working around them and figuring out the why. Really, if you can figure out the why things are bothering you, then that's it. Impulsiveness is a tough one from an emotional intelligence perspective. And again, in the full training, and I know that Abdul will be getting into that one. We work around impulsiveness quite a bit, because that is something, especially in a leadership position, having that cool, calm leadership presence is imperative. So, so that's really an area of emotional intelligence that you want to take particular note on if it's a gap area. You also want to make sure that you're maximizing your interpersonal, because if you have had that flare, you will have to circle back and fix that with that person.
Of course, great. How do you get someone to understand their need to improve their emotional intelligence when they don't see or understand the value of such skills?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this goes back to we can't control others. All we can control is ourselves, right? And so this one of these things, this will cause people frustration if they're trying to make someone else more emotionally intelligent. Sometimes with organizations or bosses, leaders, supervisors, they will send an individual for coaching to work around emotional intelligence, and so that becomes a bit more coming from sort of down. But that would be probably part of a performance management perspective. But as a leader, having those meaningful conversations and coming from a position of your own self-awareness to say, I know I grew a lot through this, and I think that you'll benefit. Sharing that vulnerability is probably a great place to start.
I've got here a question that's a segue as well. So what can we expect from your upcoming seminar? And let me put some context around that. So for those that have tuned in today, so we have the pleasure of having Lesley lead a 2-day seminar in November, approximately 3 weeks away. It's a Thursday and a Friday. It's a nice chunk of time, so it's the afternoon that it still allows you time to do what you need to do for your day job, and then come to the workshop to learn about more in this area. So if you like this content and this webinar, I think you're going to get more of that type coming in that session in about 3 weeks' time. So Lesley, the question is, what can we expect from your upcoming seminar?
Oh, well, I think that we're going to have two days, so 2 half days of goodness. We're going to dig in. We're going to go through each of the competencies really so that we understand them. It's going to be a very personal development. That being said, as I say in all of my trainings, you never have to share anything beyond your comfort zone. So don't think if to join, you have to bare your soul. Absolutely not. We're going to go through and we're going to really start to create some goals and understanding for ourselves in each of the competencies in terms of how to move ourselves forward and how to become that emotionally intelligent rock star that we want to be, and also to recognize where we're not and be okay with that, because we all want development points, right? And so how from a life, from a workplace, from a leadership, organizational perspective, you can then take that information and move yourself in positive forward motion to be the best version of you and to be the most emotionally intelligent and effective version, right? And that's a focus on a leadership, but that plays into all areas of our lives, which is the juicy goodness of emotional intelligence. And we're going to have a lot of fun doing it.
I'm really excited about that seminar as well, and that series of seminars and program coming up. And for all that are listening and wanting to join you for those 2 days, all you have to do is go onto the Goodman Group website and register there. So that's brocku.ca/Goodman-group. That's brocku.ca Goodman/Goodman-group for registration. And then you can look for EQ there. Also, there are links to this at the end of this website, at the end of this presentation, as well as on all social media channels. Great. So, another question for questions that have come in. Is there a best practice in terms of determining a candidate's level of emotional intelligence when considering them for a position within your organization?
Oh, okay. So that's a really great question. That one comes with a lot of layers of from an HR perspective on like in terms of doing an assessment. You know, there's varying schools of thought on having an emotional intelligence assessment. What I would do it is really, and what the sort of the standard best practice would be, is integrating questions into your hiring process and your screening process that are really asking questions from an emotional intelligence perspective, right? And I mean, we can always follow up offline on that, or you can do some research, but really building EI-based questions into your process is probably your best bet.
Great, fantastic. I think we may have time for one more here. Okay. What strategies would you suggest if you notice that different people on your team trigger a reaction or response based on their energy, and how would you suggest we prepare before an interaction with them so that they can stay positive?
Okay, this brings together my two happy places: energy, the energy of your life and leadership, and emotional intelligence. Okay, so this is where, as you're going through that self-awareness and that understanding, is really understanding, okay, if this person is triggering my from an energy leadership perspective, level 1 or level 2, so either powerlessness or reactivity, that catabolic energy, if they're triggering you into that catabolic energy, what is it? The why. So spend some time being mindful. What is it? Is it a values conflict, or is something they're doing, being in conflict to my values? Is it something that's in conflict to my beliefs? Are they acting in a way that, or saying things or doing things that are against something that I believe in? So that's usually when there's a high level of reactivity. It's usually a values-based conflict. And so really that's something for you to then understand, okay, so am I frustrated? Am I making assumptions? Am I stressed? Or is this a trigger? So sometimes, and we won't have time to go into the full details around this, but sometimes when you're triggered into that level of reactiveness, it's triggering your inner critic to a point where it's bringing something out in you. And so that is when you really want to do that inner work. Remember, from the self-awareness piece, our inner work drives our outer success. Because unfortunately that falls to us to fix. That's that we can't control our circumstances, and that sometimes that's teammates. But we can control our situation, our response. But we have to do that inner work to get there. I hope that helps, even as a brief answer. That's a great question.
Thank you for that. Lesley, I want to have the opportunity to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, being here and talking about this very relevant topic for many in this, especially in this time. And of course, I want to take this opportunity also to thank all of the participants, the over 130 or so that have registered to be here, for coming in and taking time out of your busy schedule. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about the topics that were covered here and the impact on leadership and taking this to that next level, feel free to join us for the sessions, for the 2 half-day sessions scheduled for November in approximately 3 weeks' time. And you may register for those by following the links here, which will be coming up on the screen momentarily, and also to brocku.ca/Goodman-group and registering for the EQ. You may also reach to myself or a member of the team here at Goodman. Any questions, comments, and feedback that you may have. In the coming days, you will also receive our newsletter, and those who have had the opportunity to register and subscribe to this, you will also receive a link to the recording for this session, or the session would have preceded this session in the month of October. So that will be coming in the coming days to you. Next week, we are joined by Brock Dickinson from University of Waterloo, and he will be talking on green futures and how innovation, entrepreneurship, and sustainability will drive the next economy. So that's our next session, which is Wednesday, November 18th at 11 to 11:45. We are transitioning to a slightly different format from November onwards. And those who have been here with us frequently would have noticed that we were here once a week, every week. We are transitioning to a two sessions monthly, or every other week, keeping to the same time frame of Wednesdays at 11 to 11:45. I want to bring you additional content, such as the one such a session that Lesley is leading in 3 weeks' time. I hope you can join us next time when we have Brock Dickinson here. Until then, stay safe.